I think when we did the blog, we found that the average value of the transactions was less than $1.50. I mean, that versus paying some bulletproof provider when you can just pay gas fees to an infrastructure that's intended to exist as long as the internet exists. I mean, that seems like a pretty good deal to me.
In this episode, we're taking on the preconceived notion of what the blockchain is used for, specifically that it's just for financial transactions. We discuss the shift from traditional infrastructure to blockchain-hosted payloads like EtherHiding, which represents a massive change in adversarial tradecraft, infrastructure that is built to be resilient, flexible, and virtually unkillable. Welcome to Behind the Binary. Joining me today is the Crypto Quartet, Robert Wallace, Joe Dobson, and Blas Kajusner, to discuss the work they've done on campaigns like Jade Snow and how North Korean threat actors are turning the blockchain into a robust delivery mechanism for modern in-memory payloads. Let's dive right into the discussion. All right, so I'm thrilled to welcome back Robert, Joe, and Blas. We're talking Web3 and kind of decentralized everything. Where are we standing right now? What are some of the the novel techniques or just interesting changes since we last talked?
So I can go ahead and kind of lead us off here. The world sort of what we talked about last time just progresses at light speed, and things change so fast that even a lot of the big recent work we've been doing has evolved in itself into just other really interesting stuff. So one of the big things that I kind of want to talk about today was sort of the work that we did around Jade Snow and basically the DPRK adopting EtherHiding. When we first saw it jump on the scene, it seemed to kind of just be a means to an end for C2 related configuration information hosting, where a Russian-speaking threat actor was kind of just trying to get people to download a executable, and this would just be written to disk, run, and it's just some sort of traditional, normal, known backdoor. And it's really progressed into just leveraging Web3 technology as a whole into a very dynamic and very robust sort of mechanism to deliver payloads and not only avoid leaving artifacts like writing them on disk, but also just make them be very flexible. So an example would be instead of running a PE file on your system that is a very well known and established backdoor, you're running some lighter weight JavaScript payload in memory, and even then you can mix and match pieces where the JavaScript payload in memory will then be able to run a Python payload as well alongside it. It's been a huge evolving game, and it's really taken a lot of twists and turns that we just haven't seen before.
Why do you think there is this shift to these more interpreted languages and not PE files? Are we getting better at blocking those, or are these just more malleable, or what do you suppose is driving that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure my friends on ThreadIntel can probably leave a better trace on this or a better comment from the analytical perspective. Obviously, loading something in memory is going to be more evasive than just writing something to disk and leaving traces there. The other interesting thing with these languages is that you can obfuscate them with a lot of widely available tools, and you can do that pretty easily. I think it just means that there's a lower barrier of entry. And on top of that, it just kind of keeps them lightweight as well. You don't have to pack in any resources or PE headers or anything like that. You can kind of just run them on the fly. So I feel like maybe one of the big responses to that is just keeping it dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that flexibility, that dynamic component, I think that's a large part of it. I think it also helps streamline infrastructure as well. So threat actors can continuously update their command and control addresses through techniques like EtherHiding, dead drop resolvers, things of that nature. So it really it introduces complexity for analysts, while at the same time being relatively simple for threat actors to implement.
I think it's not just the simplicity plays a huge role, but also think about the cost effectiveness here, right?
Yeah.
So you have two choices. You can, go out and you can use traditional bulletproof hosting, which means you're going to be paying someone for a service that hopefully they actually, are effective at. And, and that bulletproof hosting service, a lot of times they're hosting things on compromised websites or compromised infrastructure. There's no guarantee of uptime. It's called bulletproof, but is it really going to stay up? It might be routed through proxies, slow response time. Whereas with, the blockchain, it's all there. It's easily available. And to kind of double down on Robert's point about it increases complexity for analysts. Last time we talked, the one comment that I kept reinforcing was about education. And I think that's still something to reinforce now, because a lot of folks think that EtherHiding is just about targeting crypto, and that's not the case, right? All this malware that Blas is talking about, that's not about targeting exclusively crypto organizations or crypto researchers. Like, Web3 is having an impact on Web2, right? This malware is being used to target non-Web3 individuals and victims and organizations. And so it's really important that analysts in cybersecurity begin to understand how blockchain works and how malware is interacting with the blockchain, because it's not going away. It's incredibly effective. It's cost effective, and it's here to stay, literally.
Yeah, my understanding is that a lot of the usage right now is basically no cost to the attacker. That there's, through developer accounts and other methods of using the blockchain, that they don't have to pay for anything.
Yeah, I mean, a big expense there is not even just the traditional sense of transfer of money or anything that's worth of value. Usually with ether hiding, the expense is kind of just the gas fees that you pay to the network to just update something, right? So when we kind of initially visited the topic, we were talking a lot about using smart contracts, for example, and at least when I hear smart contracts, I initially associate it with, a program kind of like a vault maybe, or some sort of like, a common example is like a game, right? Where you kind of just put money into some place and then you can get it out and it's all just stored on the smart contract. With ether hiding, I mean, that is not necessarily the case. They don't make it be something that is payable. They just kind of want to store information on there and update it as they have to go with it on the fly, and all that requires is just paying a fee to the network to use up the energy that it takes to update this information and store it on there. And it's also kind of interesting to see the evolution going from a smart contract to just storing it in the transaction data, because originally the gas fees would go to the network to update something that the attacker controlled. So that you have two artifacts that you can try to pin some threat actor to, and they realized, why does that even matter when I can just kind of look at the transaction in the first place, because that's also being recorded on the ledger, and on top of that, it gets even crazier because they don't just use the most recent value, right? How they would usually do in the smart contracts, they would just kind of query the current state with an ETH call and see whatever's stored on there. They can just send different transactions and reference the older transactions for other information that they might find relevant at the time. It's just really interesting the turns that it's taken. And yes, I mean, it is still just as cheap to do, and it is still just as frequently updated as smart contracts are updated. So I don't know. I think when we did the blog, we found that the average value of the transactions was less than $1.50, right? It was like $1.30 something. I mean, that versus paying some bulletproof provider, uh, when you can just pay gas fees to an infrastructure that's intended to exist as long as the internet exists. I mean, that seems like a pretty good deal to me, right?
Yeah, and the so it's kind of almost come full circle. If you look at the Bitcoin blockchain, there's a much debated field in transactions called op return, and op return is where arbitrary data can be put in. And so if you go look at old Bitcoin transactions, you can actually see where people have put in like Satoshi's white paper, right, on Bitcoin. They've actually put that into op returns before. And so that's effectively just putting in transaction input data. Then you look at, okay, how did DPRK use some of the Jade Snow EtherHiding? They had a generic ERC20 token smart contract, and the only difference is they added a transaction text field, right? They added one variable, and for folks who are interested, like that smart contract, the source code for it, that's available, right? You can easily go on to BSC Scan, EtherScan, these different sites, and you can look at the actual source code of smart contracts. So you can go look at, hey, this is like North Korean code in the raw. And you can see the source code, see that all they did is take a normal token token smart contract, add one variable to it, and that's how they turned it. They were able to implement EtherHiding. And now, of course, things go back to just throwing it in the transaction input data, which is kind of back to where things were originally with like Bitcoin and op returns.
And I think, I think we're also seeing this across other chains as well, right? So not only is the technique evolving, but it's also evolving across different chains. I think Solana is a recent example, but also on some of the Ethereum layer twos, we've been seeing it as well. So again, making it harder for analysts to track across all these different chains. It's out there, it's available, but it's just becoming more and more widespread.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, proof of concept on something and then port it over to all the different options that are available and make it harder. This seems, I haven't gone out and tried to detect this, but this seems like it is incredibly challenging. And it sounds like you can just add these arbitrary fields that have no real impact on whatever it is you're doing on the blockchain. My initial thoughts are, okay, well, then maybe I go look for these transactions or something that have some sort of anomaly set to it. But I'm guessing if I went and started looking, I would find that there's millions or billions of transactions that meet that criteria. So it just blends right into the noise. Is that, I mean, are there effective strategies for trying to identify these? Or are we still just reacting to now there's an active campaign? We start to gather artifacts as people get attacked and we can uncover the use of their blockchain usage.
It kind of goes both ways. You can see that there is some anomalous data, and for example, if you wanted to hunt for the North Korean smart contract used for EtherHiding, then say, okay, there's this ERC20 token, right? So it's kind of a generic token, and the only time they ever mint a new token, it's going to an arbitrary address. It's not being used as an actual token. So there's that heuristic there, right? It's not being used as a token normally would, but there's this big chunk of random data. The problem is when that data is encrypted, you don't know what it is. And so it's like, I know there's something strange here, but I have no way to unwrap that package and identify what it is, and that's
Unless
where,
you have the sample.
right, that's where having the sample, right, this is where Robert comes into play, because if you have the sample, then you have that key, you can unwrap it, you can decrypt it. And so that part is more reactive because you have to have access to it somehow, but you can do some proactive hunting. And of course, once we find one smart contract that does that, it's very easy to go out and kind of spider out and pivot and find more that are very similar, as well as doing tracing of transactions and funds to figure out where did the funding come from, where is it going, who wrote it, who deployed the smart contract. There's that goes into all the crypto tracing, which is fun.
Yeah. Okay. Because these payloads typically are, I mean, this sounds like a tale as old as time now. It's some blob of text, probably encoded with base64. Maybe initially that was all that there was. Now you throw in base64 with simple symmetric encryption, RC4 or something. It thwarts our analysis without the key because the brute forcing is still kind of infeasible. So it's really effective. And if you just have proper key management, you just swap these payloads out or distribute them in a way where the keys vary enough that it just makes it difficult to unravel. So yeah, I suppose you base64 to code, and then what? You've still got a binary blob of nonsense. You can kind of maybe infer from some things from size and the other characteristics that you're talking about, though. So yeah, that sounds really, really challenging. Are there other methods that I guess organizations are able to kind of clue into when maybe they're being, this part of an attack is utilizing the blockchain? Do they monitoring? I mean, I'm guessing some organizations would say, we wouldn't expect any blockchain activity from our networks. Is there anything to that? Is there any effective strategies for identifying this and blocking it? And I mean, we're still dealing with kind of, even though the intermediate component here is across the internet and on the blockchain, like on the host, there still seems to be kind of traditional in memory, process execution and different stages being executed. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like things have changed too drastically.
So detecting this activity is tricky because if you rely on like traditional network appliances that are using heuristics, looking at like how old is a domain, right? What kind of TLS certificate is associated with a domain? Well, EtherHiding is reaching out to services that have been around for years, and so these are reputable companies. Now, if there's categorization of domains, and hey, these domains are crypto related, that might set off a flag, but it's not going to be like a super high red alert. And I think it's a short-term solution to say, hey, we're not doing anything with crypto, so we shouldn't have anybody reaching out to crypto, because it's becoming more and more pervasive, and it's going to, be in my opinion, it's going to be all over the daggone place very soon. And so organizations really need to have better defenses. And I think EDRs, better understanding of alerts, better triaging of alerts, I think that is really, really important in solving this.
Yeah, and the browser as well. I think there's tools like Chrome Enterprise Browser that have capabilities to thwart these types of attacks.
Where are these originating from? Is there any particular campaign? I think you mentioned Jade Snow, and I think I remember or read somewhere, the clear fake might have some relation or nexus to it. Is there a particular pattern here that seems to be the MO when it comes to using EtherHiding? I'm guessing though, that as we're talking about, that maybe it's associated with one type of attack chain, but it's going to become pretty prolific across the board because of the resilience.
I can go ahead and take this one. Yeah, so it really varies. I mean, we've seen a lot of different cases of how this is being implemented. Clearfake, for example, was a compromised WordPress website where malicious JavaScript code gets injected into the template, and then when a user accesses this website, they're prompted to update their browser for the website to properly render, and then that's kind of how they get you there. With Jade Snow, it definitely seemed to be a little bit more targeted. So that would usually be something like a malicious interview, and they would reach out specifically to a potential candidate, potential quote unquote victim, and that's where they would just kind of make them clone some GitHub repo that had malicious code inside of it. And then whenever they would tell the person to just like build the project or run it to test it out, that's sort of when the infection chain would kick off. But even then, that same campaign, I think, varied in other ways as well, because instead of telling them to clone a GitHub repo, they would say, hey, download this interview software. And then the software itself would say, you're missing some component, click here to download and run it. And that would kick off the infection chain instead. Not sure if you guys have seen any other interesting vectors there, but another one that I've seen as well recently was with some open source reporting I've seen, which is malicious extensions in the developer marketplaces. So like VS Code or OpenVSX, for example. There were developer accounts that were compromised, and with those compromised accounts, they would push a malicious update, and that malicious update would then begin the infection chain itself without anyone really kind of noticing that. And that again would certain campaigns there would use EtherHiding to keep the chain going and read data from Solana, for example. So I've seen different sort of initial attacks there, and yeah, that's another kind of component to the whole thing. Robert mentioned earlier that with these sort of encrypted blobs on the chain, it's way easier to be able to understand them once you get that first downloader, right, to parse out the data, because the key has to be stored somewhere. And it can be kind of tricky because the way that it's delivered could just vary so much, you know?
I think that you hit on a really important point there, and it's not exclusive to EtherHiding, but Web3 is increasingly impacting Web2. And a prime example of that is in 2025, we saw countless NPM packages become infected with, with malicious updates. And if you think about it, right, a lot of people they almost make fun of the threat actor for not stealing that much money, despite how widespread of a footprint they were able to get, millions and millions of downloads. But in reality, I think what we should do is we should consider the fact that a threat actor was able to push out these malicious updates, and it impacted a massive number of Web 2 organizations that have nothing to do with crypto at all. Nothing. And yet all of a sudden their CI/CD pipeline is filled with freaking crypto malware, right? And that brings a whole new slant to things, because now these people who they've never had to deal with crypto, they have no desire to deal with crypto, they don't want to touch it at all. It is, malware targeting crypto users is being forced upon them. And so we see from the NPM hack that, there's or ongoing NPM hacks, that there's that impact. We see from EtherHiding that Web3 is having that impact on Web2, and this is going to continue to happen. And so we've got to prepare. Blue teams, defenders have got to get skilled up and ready and understanding the technology, because it's not gonna be easy if you don't have the tradecraft.
Where do you begin with, like, security just seems to be, I mean, I've always noticed this mindset difference between, I was very much more into the development space before I got into security, and like developers have, it just doesn't seem like security is the forefront. And I guess that makes sense, because a lot of times you're given requirements docs and design docs, and it's like, we need to make this thing, build it, and focus on the user experience and making money, or making it useful, or achieving whatever the goals are. And security just doesn't always seem to fit into that. So I find myself wondering, like, how do you how do you look for, and how do you know that you've installed a bad package or a bad VS Code extension? Or I mean, especially when these package managements and these repositories are designed to be so easy to pull code that you have absolutely no idea on its accuracy and its trustworthiness. Like, where do we even begin? Organizations begin with that. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's like the $1 billion question, Josh.
Well, maybe we'll pause the podcast. We'll come up with a solution. We'll come back. We'll tell everyone we have it, and then we'll go start a company.
There you go.
I mean, there's measures that can be taken, like pinning the dependencies, so that you're only using reliable packages that you've looked at before, that you've had your teams analyze. But that doesn't scale well, right? Especially when you think about how many packages you need to use. I mean, I suppose you could use AI to also evaluate the actual changes and updates to any packages. But if you think about everyone doing that on their own, then that's not good either, right? And so I think in this case, going with the latest and greatest is sometimes not the best answer. Maybe the best answer is to take up farming, move out to the middle of nowhere, and give up all technology. I know some lovely Amish folk. Maybe they've got the right idea.
Yeah. This makes me think, years ago, kind of at the tail end of the exploit kit era, they also would heavily abuse WordPress sites, just because WordPress has the footprint of the internet. And I wondered, it was kind of a common theme to throw out, that people just scan the internet, they find these vulnerable WordPress sites, they pop them, they install their bad stuff, and they move on. And I'm like, that's challenging, right? Even with known vulnerable WordPress sites, it can take a little bit of effort to figure out the bug, and to exploit it, and to take control of the host. So I thought, well, it's probably more likely that it's coming from compromised WordPress plugins and WordPress themes, and went out trying to figure that out. Like, how could I download this whole ecosystem of WordPress plugins with a colleague, and could we find them, find vulnerabilities or malicious code inside of them? And a lot of times the malicious code has a footprint. It looks different. It looks odd than normal developer written code. But it was a difficult task, in which I would say we weren't ultimately very successful.
It reminds me a little bit, and some of the audience is probably too young to remember this, but toolbars used to be a real big thing back in like the late 90s, right? I'm sure everyone remembers, you have your Yahoo toolbar, you have your Google toolbar, you have all these different toolbars, right? And inevitably there would be some malicious toolbars that would, be tracking everything you're doing and sending you to malicious sites and stuff like that. Like this is the same battle, just modernized, right? We're fighting the same fight. It's just instead of all these unnecessary toolbars, it's all these unnecessary packages and unnecessary extensions. I find nowadays that with my browser, I'm not using near as many extensions as I used to, and it's because I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to accept the risk that, hey, are all these developers, the people who are designing the extensions, are they all secure? Because every time you're using code from someone else, you're accepting some level of risk. And for the most part, I'm not willing to do that where I can avoid it. But I'm also a little bit on the paranoid scale. So
Yeah, on that also, I mean, the big thing for me with these sort of more supply chain related attacks, we always talk about one of the biggest reasons that security is important for organizations is also the factor of credibility. Working in security in general, you're already kind of a skeptic and a little bit too paranoid. But then you have things that happen like the Ledger Connect Kit hat, for example, where you've got uh, a trusted resource, right, that gets compromised and you can get your funds drained. That's the type of stuff that maybe doesn't really lend to being fully trusting of things that you're dealing with on the day to day. So, it's more than just having uh, some elegant Web3 sort of compromise infection chain that you can probably just put a band-aid on and block all Web3 related traffic for. It's more so also just a long-term game of we want to maintain credibility. We want to really make sure that people understand that they can be safe with us. And that's kind of another reason why I think something like what we've just been talking about is pretty important to sort of keep in mind is because not only as the business owner should you be concerned about that, but also as a user of the technology. You want to make sure that what you're putting your funds in is something that you can genuinely feel confident in won't be missing come tomorrow due to some sort of Web 2 attack rather than the Web 3 stuff, you know?
Yeah. So with the the techniques like EtherHiding, the maintainers of these blockchains certainly have to become more aware of the abuse. Do you have any insight or stories or any firsthand interactions with how they are responding? Are they receptive to abuse reports? Do they even really have the ability to affect the fight and help us with takedown? And I mean, that seems to go against really what the blockchain is designed to do, to be resilient, reliable, immutable.
So it's interesting looking at how the blockchain ecosystem has evolved. Originally, it had this very anti-control slant, right? No central authority. Mm-hmm. Forking is bad. And for folks who aren't aware, forking is basically where you split the blockchain, right? And you say, hey, all this bad stuff that happened, we're just going to hit the reset button starting at a certain point in time, a certain block height. That's a very simple way to describe a very controversial topic.
That sounds like reboot.
Almost.
Did
right?
you try rebooting?
Yeah, turn it off, turn it back on.
Yeah.
Right. Go to a restore point. It used to be that idea was terrible and no one would discuss it. They hated it. But what's happening is as folks realize the impact that attackers are having on the ecosystem, they're starting to shift and they want to have more focus on security. That said, I've talked to developers for blockchains that like they're a core dev for a blockchain and they don't have EDR on their computer. Like the computer they use is their personal computer because it's so decentralized. Sometimes there may not be a foundation or someone to help fund and organize who's doing what kind of endpoint security should they have, how are they being protected against phishing attacks. and you have a lot of really anonymous developers, and that should be okay. We need to have an environment for that. We need to allow for that, but we also need to find good security solutions. I think folks are getting better, but we're still not in a good place.
Kind of to add to that as well, I've noticed that, or from the research on the previous campaigns, for example, I did notice that the times where the Web2 providers were involved, they usually were receptive from what I've seen, at least from what I've read. So an example would be the Clearfake attacks, right? Originally they were hosting what is now on what uses EtherHiding. They were hosting that on Cloudflare workers, and when Cloudflare was made aware of it, they took it down. So I have a feeling that, you know, with this sort of maturity that we're seeing now with EtherHiding and Web3, I definitely see that there could be a lot of incentive for these networks or these chains to kind of try to come up with some sort of solution or some sort of way to figure out what can be done about this, especially because, with the Web2 stuff, I mean, if you're the government, you can just seize the front end website, or with the Web2 stuff, you can seize the servers and you can subpoena the company for more information and sort of kind of put an end to it the best that you can, or get a good case going. With the Web3 stuff, you can maybe seize the front end website, but the code still lives on chain and the contract can still be interacted with, regardless of it being tagged as something that's embargoed or as something that is related to a ransomware attack or a phishing scam. These are contracts that are still live and that you can still, communicate with. So it goes pretty deep, is something that I've noticed. And I've got a feeling that it's only going to get worse if nothing's done. So it might be pretty good to start becoming a little more active or proactive, I guess, on the topic.
Yeah, you can't censor them, but you can label them, right?
Yeah, I have a variety of opinions on how to counteract the threat of EtherHiding. One of them is I think that with Web3 companies whose RPC endpoints and API services are being abused, right? If they take an active role, then not only can they say, have a zero or null response to an API call to an EtherHiding smart contract, but in theory, right? I don't know about the legalities here, but they could instead feed something back that would alert the victim that they're infected, right? Or that they're visiting an infected site, something like that. And it's a much more legally ambiguous area, but that's also something where like there's an incredible opportunity there that we wouldn't have in, a bulletproof hosting situation or in traditional kind of cyber. I'll also say that recently I was down in Argentina for the Dev Connect conference, and there was a side conference down there called DeFi Security Summit. And I always expect that when you go to a security conference, you typically expect that there's going to be security people there. One thing that was a pleasant surprise about the DeFi Security Summit is because it was perhaps because it was co-located with Dev Connect, a lot of non-security people were actually in the audience and they were interested in security. And so they were learning things about security that they didn't know before. And I think that's a really important thing that I don't know how often we see that in traditional cyber, where you'll have a traditional cyber conference that's actually attached to a larger non-cyber conference where folks can just walk over, get admittance, and learn things. But I think that has paid dividends when it comes to really, expanding what people know about the threats in Web3 and raising awareness, because they're able to just walk in, sit down, and listen. And I think that's awesome.
All right. So another area that seems to be coming up for or being used and abused is the test nets or the test networks. Can you, Joe or Blas, can you talk a little bit about what these are and how attackers are using them and the net benefit they gain versus some of the other techniques that we've been discussing so far?
Sure. So test nets are kind of just what they sound like. It is a version of a blockchain network that is made for testing. And so where you, on a production blockchain network, you have, the native tokens are worth value, right? They have value. On a test net, they generally don't. And so you can just go out and you can get the tokens for free, but through things called faucets, like you literally just go to a website, put in your wallet address and click give me testnet XYZ funds, and it'll deposit it into your wallet. But you get all the functionality of a regular blockchain. It's just it only lives for a certain period of time, and then it goes away. Because again, it's made for testing, but they can be alive for 6 to 24 months. And Blas, if you want to talk about how bad guys are using them.
Yeah, I mean, so something interesting that came up recently in some other public reporting is exactly this. I mean, I think it was about a year ago, I wrote a challenge for Flare-On, and basically that challenge used EtherHiding. Initially, there was a JavaScript uh, block that would basically get some information from another JavaScript block, and then it would eventually download and run a PowerShell payload. I noticed that querying the Binance RPC was pretty easy with PowerShell. Funny enough, recently a report came out about a sort of another click fix CAPTCHA related campaign where a website would say that you need to again download the sort of malicious payloads to get the website to work, and they are actually using EtherHiding to store malicious PowerShell on the blockchain, which will then sort of run and execute the downloading of the final payload. And it's just interesting because I always thought, why are they even bothering with the mainnet when you can just, get funds from some faucet onto your wallet, use Sepolia or Gorelli or whichever testnet you want to use, and kind of just mess around with it there, because you can just as easily query the testnet as you can query the mainnet. I did read at the time that maybe the reason to stick with the mainnet is due to its more robust nature, right? The testnet is made for testing, so someone could deploy something that will crash the whole network and it will cause it to reset. Or there could be downtimes. There could be maybe also delays in transactions because you're going to get a flood of transactions going at the same time there, because again, people are just testing something. They can try to stress test their own contracts or whatever the case may be. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, but it's also interesting how threat actors are going even cheaper, to the point where if you don't value your time, it's basically free. So that's just something that's also an interesting trend to kind of make note of, because I guarantee you it won't just be with the BNB Smart Chain. It can definitely evolve into other chains as well. I mean, like was mentioned earlier in the podcast, we have Solana being used now. There are also new samples that are using Polygon. So it's expanding and growing, and I wouldn't be surprised if even those test nets were starting to be leveraged to deliver payloads, and kind of, tangle the web even further on this whole topic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it also introduces some unique complications. Again, part of the benefit of crypto and blockchains is that the blockchains are immutable and they're around forever. But with the testnet, it's not around forever, and it's not, it's still immutable, but in a very more temporary kind of sense. And so if a threat actor wants to have their campaign exist for only a limited period of time, they can really do that with testnets. And that's quite effective. That could be a pro or a con for the threat actor, could be a pro or a con for the defender, depending on the situation. Another thing that we see rising, and we haven't seen malicious activity around this, but I think it's only a matter of time, is there's a lot of AI projects right now in crypto. And with those AI projects, that's where people can utilize tokens. They can purchase a token and spend that token in return for AI compute. And that AI compute can be used for a whole variety of things. And a lot of folks outside of crypto don't know the extent to which AI agents have a presence on chain. They're managing their own wallets. They're managing their own smart contracts. There was a saying, I don't know who said it, that AI agents will never have a credit card, but they will have a crypto wallet. And that's proving to be very, very true, because you can assign them a wallet. They can go out, they can spend things, they can make trades. Like, that's where we are now. So what happens when you have AI agents that are in charge of EtherHiding campaigns, that are in charge of monitoring, blockchain C2? And that's really it's not the direction I want things to go, but I think it is very likely the direction that things will go, just looking at kind of the pattern here.
That's terrifying and fascinating at the same time. This brave new world that we, I guess I got into technology years ago. Okay. I would always tell myself and others, why do I like it? Is this always changing? It's always learning. I find as I've gotten older, some days it's a little bit more challenging to wake up and say, I'm ready to continue learning every single day, but definitely it keeps me coming back. So this sounds like a topic we're going to probably visit on here in a future episode of our Web3 crypto quartet. I think with that, any other topics or comments? I'll leave the floor here as we start to wrap up. I'll leave the floor to you all if you have anything else that you want to end on or discuss. Otherwise, I think it's safe to call it another episode.
Yeah, all good here.
Thank you much.
Yeah. Thanks all for joining me again today. And for everyone listening, stay tuned. We'll continue the series here in the future as we'll continue to explore the world of decentralized everything, Web3, Web2, where the threat actors are taking it. So hope to see you all in one of those future episodes. And that's all for this episode of Behind the Binary. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It really helps us to reach new listeners. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.